Today in this 2017 Ford Edge, we'll be having a look at and showing you how to install the Blue Ox baseplate kit with removable arms, part number BX2667. Here's what our baseplate looks like installed. As you can see, it's a nice concealed look. It goes right in the corner of our fascia here, up out of the way. It doesn't affect our grill opening really here at all, so it gives us a really clean look. We have a easy attachment point for the safety cables that'll go between our edge and our motorhome. So if using our safety cable here, you can see we have plenty of clearance and it won't contact any of our painted surfaces at all. We have these prongs on the front of our base plate which serve as an attachment point for any of our electrical needs for doing a flat tow setup for our towed vehicle lighting systems. We also have a mounting location to put your breakaway switch for your supplemental braking system. Now, one thing that I really like about this base plate compared to others on the market is that with our removable arms having a small diameter, it really gives us a clean look. And when we want to flat tow our vehicle, it's super easy. We can insert the arm with this tab at a horizontal angle, push, and then our spring-loaded pin will retract and we can rotate it, and then the pin will lock into place so we can't remove the arm. When we do want to remove the arm, once we arrive at our destination and want to drive our vehicle around town normally, we simply pull on the pin, rotate back 90 degrees, and we can remove it. Both of our arms operate exactly the same way. One great thing about this base plate is that it'll work with most Blue Ox tow bars without a problem. So if you already own a Blue Ox tow bar, you don't have to worry about replacing it, most likely. If you do have one that's not compatible with it, we do sell adapters that'll work with the arms on our website. Now that we've gone over some features, we'll show you how to get it installed. Now on this particular flat tow setup, we used a Blue Ox Avail tow bar. We used the Roadmaster Universal High Power Diode Wiring Kit for our towed vehicle lighting system. And for our supplemental braking system, we used an SMI Stay and Play Duo. Now, depending on your application, you may or may not need a high-low adapter to ensure that your tow bar is at the proper level between the motorhome and your edge. We have several different options available for you on our website. To begin our install, we need to remove this cover panel that goes between our radiator and the front of our fascia. In order to do that, we'll have 12 push-pin fasteners like this one that we need to remove. The way these work, so there's a center section that you can pop up with a flathead screwdriver or a trim panel tool, and then the entire pin can be removed. And here's what it looks like removed. We'll do the same for all 12. With all the fasteners removed, we can simply lift up on it and set it aside. Now on each side of our fascia, we'll have 3 10mm screws to remove. It's the same on both sides. Now we need to remove our headlight assemblies. In order to do that, there's 2 10mm screws on each corner. Now we can lift up on our headlight assembly, push towards the windshield, and it'll come loose. And we can undo our electrical connector right here. We'll press it on this black tab and pull to separate. And we'll set it aside. Keep in mind everything we do on one side will repeat on the other. Now where our fascia is bolted to our fender, we'll have 3 8mm screws that we need to remove. Now on our wheel wells, we'll have 6 5.5mm screws that we need to remove that attach our fender liner to our fascia. Now underneath the vehicle, our underbody panel that goes to our fascia, we'll remove all of the 5.5mm fasteners that hold it in place.
as well as the 5.5mm fasteners. We'll have two 7mm fasteners on each side to remove. Now there's one plastic fastener on each side to remove as well. It's the same as the other ones up top. Now we can grab the panel, pull down, and away from the vehicle.
Now with the next set of hands, we'll remove our fascia. In order to do that, we'll grab where it meets our fender, and we'll pull away from the fender. We'll pull it forward, away from the vehicle. Now if you have park assist sensors or fog lights, you'll have a couple electrical connectors to undo, and they're located off the driver's side frame rail right here. It's the same as our headlight, where we push it in the black tab and pull to separate. We'll also need to unplug our horn because the harness is built in. And there's one final one right here. Now we can set our fascia aside where it won't get damaged. On the passenger side of our vehicle, we find a sensor here. This is our ambient air temperature sensor. We'll need to unclip that from this shroud here to have clearance around our base plate. So we'll just take our trim panel tool or flathead screwdriver, and we'll unclip it. And we'll also unclip the wiring harness for our sensor from the shroud as well. Now at each corner of our air dam right here, we have this section in the middle where I marked off with a paint marker. We need to remove this to have clearance for our base plate. We're just going to cut this off. I'm using a pair of aviation snips to do this. Now on each side of our vehicle, we have an extension that comes off of our subframe. We need to drill a small pilot hole in between these two holes. Now we'll use that pilot hole as a guide and make an 1.25" diameter hole with a hole saw. Now where our bumper beam right here extends out and bolts to the frame of our vehicle, we need to drill an access hole here in this general area. It's the same on both sides. So we'll make a small pilot hole first. With our pilot hole now made, we now have a guide to use our hole saw again. Okay, now on the back of where our bumper beam attaches to our vehicle, we have a square hole here. We need to enlarge this to 3/8 of an inch in diameter. Now, the easiest way to do this is to come in at an angle with your drill. Now, because we're drilling at an angle into a square hole, the likelihood of the drill bit catching and breaking is extremely high. So if you have your drill turned up to a high speed, if you have high speed and light pressure, it won't catch and it'll go through it fairly quickly. Okay, on each end of our bumper, we have this plastic padding here. I made some marks where we need to trim off this end. So let's use our aviation snips again and cut that away. Now on the top of our bumper beam, there's this overhang right here that sticks up. We need to trim this section off so our base plate bracket can sit flat atop the bumper beam. So I'll use a rotary tool to do this. This is the easiest way of doing this. Okay, with that small section cut off, we'll now take a hammer and just flatten the rest of it out. Okay, now on our frame horn extension here, where we drilled our 1.25" hole, we need to trim off the bottom section here to allow for base plate clearance. We want to make sure that this bottom section is flush with the frame horn extension. So I'm going to use a rotary tool to do this. Now we'll take one of our medium length 3/8 bolts, a lock washer, and a flat washer. And for every bolt that we're installing at this point in time to secure our base plate, we'll put red Loctite on it. We'll now take our base plate, line it up over the 2 holes, and go through the back hole right here. We'll take a handle nut and we'll thread the bolt loosely into the handle nut. Alright, we got that one started. Now we can do the front one. The front one will use the same bolt, but just a lock washer and no flat washer. Quick tech tip, if we take our spacer block here with our long 1/2" bolts, we can use this to help support the weight of our base plate as we're installing it. You just go over your bumper beam and we'll thread it in to the base plate on each side. Now, because our vehicle is not equipped with grille shutters, we don't need this section of plastic right here, because it's going to be in the way for our base plate cross tube. So we'll go ahead and just cut it off right here. On the bottom, we'll have 2 plastic fasteners to remove, plus 2 7mm screws. Now we'll take our cross tube for our base plate. We'll take our shorter 1/2" diameter bolts with a lock washer. We'll hold it up to our base plate arms, line the holes up, and insert the bolts through the front. Doing the same on both sides. On the back side where our bolts come through our base plate from our cross tube, we'll place Loctite on the bolts, and we'll thread on a flange nut. We'll do the same on the other side. All right, now that we have our cross bar in place between our 2 removable arm sections here, we removed our bolts that we were holding up our base plate with temporarily. We'll place our block back over our bumper beam. Now we have our lock washers on those bolts, and we'll place on some Loctite and we'll thread these in for the final time. We're just snugging these bolts down right now. Once we have them snug, we can move on to tightening the rest of our hardware. Okay, with all of our hardware now in place, we'll snug it down and torque it to the amount specified in the instructions. On these, we'll want to tighten these down and torque them so it gets torqued evenly. Now we need to attach our lower base plate support to the side of our base plate. There's a side that has weld nuts on, that'll go to our base plate. The side with no weld nuts, that'll eventually attach to our subframe. So we'll take one of our longer 3/8 bolts, lock washer, make sure we put our Loctite on, slide that up behind our base plate, and we'll secure it with the bolt. We'll do that in both locations. We'll tighten these bolts down now, and we'll torque them. Now we use the holes that are in our base plate support as a guide to drill through our subframe extension. We're going to do the hole that's closest to the back first. The back one gets one of our handle nuts that's square. So we'll insert that through our base plate, and then the hole that we made earlier in our subframe. We'll line it up. We'll take one of our longer 3/8 bolts and a lock washer, or Loctite on, and we'll thread the bolt into the handle nut. Okay, we'll leave that loose for the time being. Now we'll do our front one. All right, we'll still be using a bolt and a lock washer with Loctite, but this time we're using the handle nut that has a flange nut on it. With both of those bolts now started, we'll tighten them down. And we'll torque them to the amount specified in the instructions. Now, because our base plate is primarily bolted to our bumper beam, we need to add 2 reinforcement bolts per side for our bumper beam to our vehicle. So in order to do that, we're going to drill 2 holes, one about in this area here, another one about in this area here. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. Now that we have our holes drilled, we'll take a shorter 3/8 bolt, a lock washer, and a flat washer. Place some Loctite on. We'll go through the hole in the front. And on the back side of the bolt, we'll place on a flat washer. And we'll thread on a nylon lock nut. Sometimes it's easier to twist the bolt onto the nut. And we'll do the same for the other hole. Okay, now that we have our hardware in place, we'll go ahead and tighten it down. We'll be sure to torque those bolts as well. We went ahead and attached our safety cables to our base plate using the provided quick link. And when we routed these, we made sure they went around a solid piece of the vehicle. So ours goes around where the subframe bolts to the body. That's a very solid bolt, and you don't have to worry about it coming loose. When routing these cables, you want to make sure you avoid any moving parts or anything that could cause damage, such as any hoses. On the passenger side cable, there is no good way of really routing this to avoid the AC compressor or the serpentine belt. So you want to make sure you do secure the cable away from that as far as possible. We used a couple of zip ties to do this. Okay, now we can remove the leftover parts of our handle nuts. In order to do that, just take a pair of side cutters, get a nice tight grip on it, and then bend it back and forth. And it'll come off. We'll do this for all of our handle nuts. Now, anywhere where we made holes that we drilled in the vehicle, we'll take some spray paint to cover up the metal edges so we don't have to worry about rust in the future. Okay, while we have the fascia off, this is a good time to run any electrical wires we'll need for a towed vehicle lighting system, or for using a supplemental braking system to mount our breakaway switch. We have many different options of wiring and braking systems available for you on our website if you'd like to purchase one. We also secured our ambient air temperature sensor to our base plate with a zip tie. We did this so that air can hit it directly and we can get an accurate temperature reading inside of our vehicle. The location where this was mounted before is not going back onto the vehicle since it had to be cut off in order to have clearance for our base plate. Okay, now we need to trim our fascia so we can put it back on. These triangular sections here in our lower grill opening, these need to go away. I'm going to use a rotary tool to cut this. You can also use a very sharp utility knife, but I find a rotary tool is the best way of doing this. Okay, now we have an extra set of hands. We're going to reinstall our fascia now, making sure we replug in any of our electrical connections that we undid. And we'll reinstall our headlights as well, making sure they get plugged back in. And that completes our look at and installation of the Blue Ox baseplate kit with removable arms, part number BX2667 on this 2017 Ford Edge.
Thanks for watching. Click the link in our description below to shop, learn more, or visit us at etrailer.com. And leave us a comment if you have any questions.